Well, let's remind ourselves very quickly about Guinea's turbulent recent past. Now, Guinea was ruled for 26 years by Lansana Conte after he seized power in a coup in April 1984. Now, when Conte died last December, the military quickly took over, with Captain Moussa Dadis Camara declaring himself the president of the republic. But there has been tension between the junta and the opposition ever since, culminating in September with the massacre of an estimated 157 people at an opposition rally in Conakry. Well, Ayo Johnson is an African affairs analyst. He joins us live in the studio to discuss the situation in Guinea now. So he's been in power for a year, essentially. How has that year been?
Well, it's been quite a mixed one. I mean, he came to power through the barrel of a gun, be it a bloodless coup nonetheless. But he had a lot of support from the people. Clearly, they came out in the streets to support him because they wanted someone different to rule them for a change after that long spell from a different leader. But nonetheless, it soon changed when some of the promises that he had made didn't materialize, but especially so when he'd promised that he wouldn't stand for presidency when the forthcoming elections, which are due next month. And he changed that position back in September, and clearly quite quickly the population changed and there were loads of riots, demonstrations that is, and of course it so happens that large numbers of people were killed at this rally, and of course it so happens now that the United Nations has made it very clear that they want to investigate the numbers of people who died and the reasons why that happened, and it so happens that's why we're in this position now where Mr. Camara himself has been shot by the person who was meant to be a scapegoat.
Indeed. Now, Mr. Camara is now out of the country. He's being treated in Morocco for the head wounds. Who's in charge now?
Well, we've got this new fellow called Konate, who's his deputy. The question is, how strong is he? And whether the rest of the other strollers will rally behind him. More than likely, we could have a coup. That's ever so likely at this junction. But there's also the possibility that Mr. Camara himself may not be in a fit, condition to come back into the country. Mm-hmm. And even if he was well, there's always the possibility that he could find himself in exile, voluntarily so.
A very volatile situation, obviously, which possibly could spread across to its neighbours. How key is Guinea in the regional context?
Well, Guinea is pivotal. We've had a neighbour in Sierra Leone who's coming through a war for over 10 years, and we've got instabilities in Liberia, and they're coming through the problems that they had with Charles Taylor in that country. We must understand that these are fragile states, and the conditionality that led to the fragility would ever become so that much more apparent, especially if there were instabilities in Guinea, which could spill over to those countries.
What's the situation for the people living in Guinea? I mean, they had a relatively stable government for decades, and now they've had this upheaval. But what are conditions in Guinea like? Well,
conditions are awful. I mean, Guinea is one of the poorest countries in the world. That's not to take anything away from the Liberia and Sierra Leone, who are very poor in themselves. But really, large numbers of people are desperate. They do not have access to food. They do not have access to jobs, and of course, things that you and I take for granted, basic electricity. If you go to Conakry today, it's a very dark city. Large numbers of people do not have the basic needs that are expected of a civilized and functioning state. And it's because of these elements which people have always been requesting and seeking for change, be it from Sekou Touré to Lansana Conte to where we are now with Mr. Camara. And the need for change is desperate. And it's so important that as we move up, leading on to the elections which were due in January, that goes ahead.
Well, President Camara will, I presume, be desperate to get back to the country as soon as he can to maintain his position. Who do you think would be the biggest threat to his position there?
Well, I think all the soldiers would be trying to see who can take over. They all want to be in charge. But I think it shows how fluid the situation is, and the fact that the army itself is not working under one umbrella. It hasn't done so for some time. And Mr. Camara has made that endlessly in terms of the information that he's passed on to the media and through other outlets, that he's not been able to take control of his soldiers. And I think no one's going to actually be able to control that country that quickly. It remains to see exactly how the army would react, but more than likely we could see a coup, and more than likely we could see a situation where Mr. Camara himself, if he becomes well again, may find it extremely difficult coming back into the country.
Indeed. So how tense do you think the situation is within the country right now? Because we know that the person who shot, or at least we think we know that the person who shot President Camara is now not he hasn't been caught. He's on the run, from what I understand.
That's correct.
Which possibly suggests that he does have support. I mean, it seems unlikely that you would just shoot the president and then be able to just get away with it.
Absolutely. But you must understand that Mr. Camara, from the sort of lifestyle that he's been accustomed to, lived not the luxurious lifestyle that you and I would expect from a president, but much more down-to-earth individual. And I'm not sure how loosely, in terms of the numbers of people that could actually have access to him. But more than likely, it would be extremely difficult for other leaders or other aspiring would-be leaders to take control of that country, because Mr. Camara, who was seen as the level-headed individual, among them be it renegade soldier platoon, it would be extremely difficult to see who else can take the mantle.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on the situation in Guinea. For the moment, Ayo Johnson, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us here on Al Jazeera.
All right, still to come on this hour of news.